Expectations and agreements is a leadership conversation. It's a mature conversation. It's that I'm going to have this conversation now because I have vision for where this relationship will go if we don't. And so, ma'am, sir, let's slow down and let's start right here.
Hello and welcome to the Remarkable CEO Podcast, a show dedicated to chiropractors who want to transform their job into a business so that they can have a remarkable practice as part of a remarkable life, not instead of one. With your hosts, Dr. Pete Camiolo and Dr. Stephen Franson.
What's up, Remarkables? Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable CEO Podcast. I'm Dr. Stephen Franson.
And I'm Dr. Pete Camiolo.
Hey, lucky you found yourself right at the beginning of an awesome 7-part series on retention. It's the 7 reasons your patients drop out of care. That's right, Doc. We said your patients. Don't take it personally. Actually, no, we want you to take this wicked personally, right? So what we talked about in our last episode was losing patients is off purpose and bad for business, right? We all know we're in the business of saving lives. So let's train like it, right? So this 7 reasons your patients drop out of care. We're on number 2. Today, we're going to be talking about setting up expectations and agreements. If you missed the first episode, go back and check it out. It was on product confusion. And man, we had this conversation around, what does product confusion mean? Ultimately, it means you're selling one thing and they're buying another thing, right? And you let that relationship start like that and stay like that. And of course, that goes sideways and doesn't end well. It feels wonky. It's usually stressful for both of you. And man, it never has a happy ending, right? So we want to make sure that we're all getting on the same page, that number one, you and your team are very clear around what is your product, what's for sale here, what's the outcome, what's the goals, and what's our process, how we deliver that product, right? So, and then the consumer, the seeker that finds you guys, they're really clear on, listen, the purpose of a business is to solve a problem for another human being. You guys actually solve my problem. And if I'm hearing you right, because you guys listened to me and I felt heard, so now I'm listening to you. And what I heard was I can actually get what I want and what I need. So man, just an awesome episode. Make sure you check that out. Product confusion. Today, we're going to be talking about expectations and agreements. And Dr. Pete, I know you're like me. We only want successful, long-term, productive relationships, right? No short-term, stressful, unproductive relationships, right? So we want successful, long-term relationships. And all of those successful, long-term relationships always begin with 2 things in common, and that's clear expectations and honest agreements.
So this is a conversation that obviously it applies to all parts of our lives. So as a CEO, I think, we don't have the luxury of just talking about the doctor-patient relationship. We're talking about the relationship that you have with your team. We're talking about the relationships that you have with your partners in the community, other businesses that you develop relationships with, any other vendor or professional relationship that you have in our chiropractic profession in your community. So as CEOs, as we have this conversation today, I do want to speak into that because I know some of you have had relationships that have gone sideways professionally, like business to business relationships. And some of it's because this just wasn't done well on the front end. Okay. So this is not just today's conversation. We do want to talk about and obviously focus on your patients and your retention. But I also, Dr. Stephen, want the CEOs as they're listening to think, how does this apply to all of the relationships? As a CEO, you are in a relationship business. That's one of your number one objectives is developing and maintaining relationships with key people so that your business can continue to move forward. I mean, it's one of the key objectives that I find as a CEO that is part of my role for our organization, for the company. So remember that this applies to all relationships. And I'm remembering back to before my wife and I got married that we did premarital counseling. And part of that premarital counseling was, and I'm grateful for, was getting clear on expectations around some specific things. One of them was money, right? Which they said was a really important one. Another one was about kids. Another one was just, career and thinking about those things. And even now, when we look back, years and years later, we said, hey, I wish we would have done a better job setting those expectations. We didn't know what we didn't know. And so with this, many of you now, as you're listening, are CEOs and you've been around the block a few times. And now you're saying to yourself, yeah, I wish I knew what I know now, and I would have applied it earlier in my earlier years in practice. Hey, we share your scar tissue. We share that. So we're having a conversation with you today about something that just requires a higher level of maturity. And it's saying, listen, before we get started with this relationship, let's define it.
Yep.
Let's define it, guys. That's what we're doing here. We're saying, and guess what? If you don't lead it, it won't happen, or it'll happen based on the definition of what your patient believes or thinks. And that's not going to go well for anybody. You're going to lose your staff. You're going to undermine all the culture in the company, which we said in the last episode. This is a cultural conversation, the retention one, and that's a CEO. That's a CEO objective. One of your accountabilities, what you're responsible to govern. And so it's absolutely vital, Dr. Stephen, that as we dig into this conversation, that it's about defining the relationship and what is chiropractic going to be in their life.
That's right. This is all about a story, right? So, we live life as a story, right? We learn through stories, we teach through stories. So every relationship is a story, right? So is this going to be a success story? Is it going to be a love story? Is it going to be a horror story, right? So much of this, relationship capital that we have in business as a leadership is going to be shaped in the beginning of the story, right? So I love the definition of a story. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end, right? So it's like, I always think of these relationships, like think of your doctor-patient relationships as having three parts. It's early, middle, and end, right? So it's the early, middle, and late part of the story of the relationship. I'm going to tell you right now, to have successful long-term relationships, you got to focus on the beginning of the story, the early part of the story, the beginning, right? Where in the very beginning, when there's all kinds of creative energy around shaping this relationship, right? So it is like, listen, we're going to go down a path together. We're going to be going on a journey together. Let's define this journey. Let's define this path. Let's define this relationship. And so much of that has to happen on the front end, and setting up expectations around, here's what this journey is. This is what chiropractic has for you. This is what's possible for you to help you reach your immediate short-term, long-term goals. This is what's available to you, giving people back hope, giving them truth, giving them personal responsibility, right? So laying out the path for them as part of this is what chiropractic has for you. Well, this is the role that I will play for you in your chiropractic walk, right? This is the role I'll play as your chiropractor, right? So defining your role, defining their role as the patient, right? So what we have to do is we've got to create this dynamic where they understand that chiropractic is a done with you, not a done for you program, right? This is a partnership, right? So if you're doing creative work, if you're doing corrective care, if you're planning on coming alongside them for regular chiropractic care across a lifetime, you want to assume a role as you are their doctor, not their pal. You are their Sherpa. You are the guardrails to come around them on their path. I'm going to do it with you, but I can't do it for you. I wish I could. It would be easier if I could. I'd rather do it for you, but I can't. But I'm happy to do it with you, right? You've got to shape that expectation from the beginning that this is a partnership. And that's really what expectations and agreements are all about. And really, it's a two-way conversation. It's a dialogue. Here's what you can expect from me to make this a successful relationship and experience for you. This is what I will expect from you. Right. So to make this a successful relationship and journey, now your turn is to say, this is what you expect to bring to this relationship. And what do you expect from us to make this a successful experience? So there has to be this exchange of expectations and agreements so that we start really strong and we tee this relationship up for success. We do expectations and agreements, not fantasies and assumptions, because unfortunately that's how most relationships are built. They're built on that sand foundation of fantasy and assumption, where when the storm comes, it washes it away, right? So Dr. Pete, I know you're like me in that we will slow down to speed up. We will stop and really intentionally and deliberately say, you know what, this relationship, like all relationships, is ripe with opportunity for us to screw this up. Let's not do it that way. Let's sit down. Let's get clear. These are the expectations and agreements. This is my job. This is your job. Let's get after it.
And what I love about this, Dr. Stephen, this is a leadership conversation. We talk about troubleshooting and solving problems. And how do you solve a problem? Well, you should troubleshoot it. And when you troubleshoot, you should start at the beginning, which is vision. Are we clear on where we're going, what success looks like? What are we trying to accomplish? The second one is leadership. And this is, are you able to lead? Are you leading them? Are you able to lead them? And who do I need to become to lead them? This is a who do we need to become conversation, because as the CEO, this is something maybe that you have, and you maybe are capable at this and maybe proficient, but are the members of your team. This is a podcast your team should listen to, because for many of you who are listening, if you're a team member, you're a big part of setting the expectations and the agreements up front on the front end. This is a big part of your role in the journey for a new patient coming on board, and also compliance. Oftentimes the compliance officer is also a non-doctor role. And so this is a conversation, docs, CEOs, that has to be translated to your team, that the team members need to be empowered. To empower means to transfer authority. Like the authority comes from you essentially through them. And so they're able to execute on things, and they're empowered, equipped, right? Which means they have the tools and the training to deliver what is expected. So it is a leadership conversation that we're having here. And the question is, do you get it? Do you understand it? Do you have the capacity to do this? Do you have the ability? Because some people come from messed up, broken lives. They've never had expectations and agreements set in their lives. They work in your practice. They've never really learned this because it's not something that was never taught to them, never demonstrated, never really experienced it outside of maybe some sort of a very structured school setting.
Yeah, they have no modeling for it. They've not
no
been,
model,
they've
and so
not seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, so we this is a really important leadership conversation that I just don't want us to move too fast. We're seeing now, again, we have visibility into hundreds of practices, which means we have thousands of employees that we get to hear about on a regular basis, and we hear this enough that your team is not haven't been trained like you. They haven't been through all the schooling you've been through. They haven't taken all the risks that you've taken. They haven't made the big decisions necessarily to start businesses and do the things that you're doing. And with that, there's just less quote unquote skin in the game. But this is a skin in the game conversation. Expectation and agreements is a leadership conversation. It's a mature conversation. It's that I'm going to have this conversation now because I have vision for where this relationship will go if we don't.
That's right.
And so, ma'am, sir, let's slow down and let's start right here. And so the first thing is, this is a leadership conversation. And as chiropractors, great leaders develop other leaders. That's the goal. The goal isn't that people would follow you. The goal is that the people would follow through with what your leadership team has instructed and empowered them to do. And so this is about transferring authority. It's about leadership. It's about ownership. You take ownership over your practice, your patient taking ownership over their healthcare, us creating a partnership where we both have our roles clearly defined. This is what you can expect from me. This is what I expect from you. Do you agree? Do you agree? Are we good? Are we good? And then when things hit the fan, which they're going to happen,
absolutely,
it's going to happen. Okay. So let's just be real. We can show up two people, two adults, to a conversation, and we can work it out. So unfortunately,
sorry, good. Keep going.
Yeah. So unfortunately, these relationships, a lot of times end sideways. It doesn't end well, and it doesn't have to be that way. We can salvage the relationships here, and we can keep relationships so much better long term. And again, this is a very proactive conversation, Dr. Stephen. This is, they hire us for our expertise. They pay us for accountability. That conversation is right here. It's about accountability. We're here to help you. This is how we help you. We're going to hold you accountable. Accountable to what? Well, one of the things that we teach is the three-legged stool, right? And it's very simple. That's one of the geniuses behind that three-legged stool. It's saying, hey, we're going to hold you accountable to a few things. And we're accountable to hold you accountable. And we're going to tell you what those things are. And we're going to follow through and follow up with you on that. And you're accountable to doing it. Do you agree? Yeah, I agree. Why? Because of the outcome. That's the outcome you want. Is that the goal you have? Do we agree on that? Yeah, we're moving in that direction towards your goal. So Dr. Stephen, again, it comes back to a leadership conversation. It comes back to accountability. And again, this is 100% a CEO conversation.
Yeah. So, I mean, what do we hold them accountable to? We're holding them accountable to our recommendations for care.
Yeah.
So, as part of this early stage of the story, early part of the story, when we're shaping their expectations, really the expectations start with recommendations for care, right? So like literally your clinical recommendations for care, so, Pete, you're making reference to the three-legged stool. It's follow your adjustment rhythm, right? So we're going to give you recommendations around receiving chiropractic care, chiropractic adjustments. It's going to be at a given frequency. It's going to be at a given rhythm for a given period of time. That's your recommendations for care for getting adjusted. And we're also going to give you recommendations around breaking bad habits. And then we're also going to give them recommendations around adding exercises. So it's like, get your adjustments in rhythm. Don't mess with the doctor's schedule. We're going to teach you what habits you have to break. So you're working with us, not against us, right? So our job is to teach you the habits you need to break. Your job is to break the habits. Then we're going to teach you the exercises that you'll need to fold into your life so that you can strengthen your spine and hold your adjustments longer, which is the objective of care. So we're going to teach you the exercises. That's our job. Your job is to actually do the exercises. And then, of course, with the adjustment rhythm, our job is to tell you how often you need to be adjusted. Our job is to check you to see where you're ready to be adjusted and to, of course, deliver the great adjustments and the education. Your job is to show up in rhythm, right? So it's like my job, your job. That's setting expectations. And we make an agreement around those things. Do you agree? Yes. In order to reach your goals, this is what you need to do to get what you want. Do you agree? Yes, great. So you set up that agreement. Now we have expectations and agreements. Okay. Then we go through financial recommendations for care. It's like, this is what it costs. This is how you can pay. You can pay it one time. You can pay it monthly payments. How do you want to pay every time you hear, however you want to do it. You set up a financial agreement. Our expectation is that you're actually going to pay for your care, right? Here's the agreement that we make around that, how you pay, when you pay, et cetera. That's an expectation agreement. Then we teach you about office policies. The office policy is simply guardrails. They're guardrails to protect your experience so that you can get the best possible outcomes predictably, right? So this is your first time as a chiropractic patient doing corrective care. We've done this 20,000 times, right? So here are the guardrails to ensure you'll have the best experience and best outcomes. Those are the office policies. These are our expectations. You're going to follow them. Do you agree? Right. And then it's patient training. Here's how you behave as a patient in our office. Don't come early, don't come late, come on time. You come up to the front desk, you check in, you go over here to the hot seats, you wait to get into the, right? So you get on the table. This is what you can expect. This is how long a visit takes. This is not a time for consultation. This is a time for the doctor to check you, adjust you, and give you an education. Like, you're setting all of these expectations, and that's called patient training, right? So each and every piece of this is shaping the relationship. You're shaping the story so you get a good, strong start to the story. And the key to this, guys, as CEOs, is you have to recognize this is a cultural thing. As the CEO, as the leader of this business, what you're going to recognize is what we're interested in is successful, long-term, productive relationships, right? And we know that those relationships, those expectations and agreements, those are delivered on your toes proactively in the beginning of the relationship. We don't want to be trying to do that on our heels as we're reacting to a relationship that's going sideways. Remember, we're in the thick of this series, the 7 reasons people drop out of care, right? The 7 reasons your patients drop out of care. This is reason number 2, which is expectations and agreements. Don't try to build a practice that's going to create and collect ideal patients using fantasies and assumptions. We create ideal patients by leveraging expectations and agreements.
And I just want to chime in on a couple of things here, Dr. Steven. I think this is really important to be said, and I need to say it, is there's a couple resources that I believe that we have for you that can really help with this. Because I think if you're like me and you're hearing all of this conversation today on this podcast episode, and if you listen to the last one, you're like, man, this is really good stuff. It's a lot. It's a lot to take in, like getting crystal clear on the product, and then not just me having that clarity, but my team, and then not only my team having it, but then the patient, and making sure everybody's clear, and then having expectations and agreements, getting those set. Like, that sounds really challenging and hard. And so I just want you to know there's a couple of resources. Number one is we have the Remarkable Practice Academy resource. And in that, in that resource, you have the frameworks, tools, you actually have scripting and things like that to support you and your CAs to help you with that. I know that if I was left up to myself to try to figure it all out, I just probably wouldn't do it. Not because I don't value it, just because I don't. It's a how conversation. It's a time conversation. It just feels like it's really hard. So we try to make it easy for you. So ours is a done with you as well, and we say, hey, we have resources for you. So if this is hitting on a pain point in an area of, I need to focus on this area in our practice, we could probably really grow this area. Here's what I would say. You don't need, X number of new patients. If you could just keep the folks you got, I'll tell you what, that's the fastest way for you to grow your practice in the second half of this year and moving forward. You're going to find there's all sorts of folks to adjust and all sorts of money to be collected, value to be added, and lives to be transformed within the context of your current patients. So we want to get really good at expectations and agreements. I would encourage you to jump into the Remarkable Academy. If you're a part of our academy or a coaching client and you're just like, man, I haven't been in there in a minute, I want you to go to the day 3. And you just go check out the trainings that are on day 3. It's so powerful, and just get into that. The second thing I want to say is, and this is coming up in a few months, that we do have a retention event that we're going to be hosting this year. Finally, we're back live together. It's going to be in the fall, October 22nd and 3rd. We would love for you to come and train with us. We recently had a training finally back together again in Florida. And we got to go to Orlando, and we got to get into rooms together and just train on, conversion and the doctors and the CAs. And I'll tell you what, it was so powerful. And I loved connecting with so many of you who listen to this podcast at that event. I loved having conversations afterwards saying, how was that? And everybody just, kind of raving about that. Was really important. It was much needed. And man, I was reminded of the value, and we took away a lot of things, and we're already seeing those things implemented in our practice, and our practice taking to the next level, becoming more remarkable. Well, guess what? We have another one of those opportunities. So check it out. We'll put a link here as part of this episode, so you can check out that live event. It's going to be, like I said, Chicago, October 22, 23. Here in North America, we'll also have an event happening in Australia as well. I'm not sure the 100% of the date, but you can see that on our site. And I just encourage you to plug in. This is such an important lift. And as a CEO, one of the things we attributes of a remarkable CEO is using leverage. And one of the things you leverage is training. And one of the things that you leverage is the community, right? The community of people that you can surround yourself with. So we're here to support you and serve you with that. And so if we can, please do that. And then if you have any specific questions about this or really any topic, feel free to message both either Dr. Stephen or myself on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn or wherever you like to send messages. But we're happy to help you and support you in this. Ultimately, because here's the deal, like you said, Dr. Stephen, losing people is off purpose. That's why. And we're in the business of saving lives. And so if we're losing people, that's bad for business. And we don't want that to be your story anymore. So thank you so much for being a part of this remarkable podcast. This is part 2 in a series. We'll be picking up next week with part 3. So make sure you tune again in next week. And until then, take care, everyone.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Remarkable CEO Podcast. Remember, what the world needs now is chiropractic. And what chiropractic needs now is more successful chiropractors. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, share with a friend, and leave us a review. And if you'd like to connect with us personally, direct message us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram. Now go and be remarkable.